Okay, first up is Michael Lee. It's good. This is definitely improved. I think the sort of film aging and scratches is much more believable. One thing I'm finding odd is if you look closely, the letters seem to be moving differently than other parts of the graphic, like the frame, like they're moving counter to each other. And the thing is the sort of jerkiness of an old film. You wouldn't have things within the frame moving relative to each other because it's that the whole frame is shaking a little bit because the film isn't going through the projector in a very perfect way. So there's some shake, but the whole image would shake, not parts of the image against each other, if you get what I'm saying. It's like the frame thing here has a different shake than the letters did. So that would be something to change. Another thing I think it would help is if you added some sound to this. But overall, it's a good look. I think you've done nice work. Okay, next up is Kendra. Okay, so yeah, looking good. Nice music and sound. I like the way this thing rolls in. Because it's sort of sliding along the ground, you might want to increase the amount of rotation so it kind of appears more to be rolling on the ground than sort of sliding as it rolls. So just kind of experiment with the amount of rotation there until it looks like it's kind of sticking to the ground. So if you look closely again, see how it looks like it kind of slides, like it's basically just not rotating far enough. You have an opportunity to maybe do something with the arm or something that the cat could kind of tap it in that sort of funny cat-like way. I think the J is good. I think I'm not that convinced with the rest of this font. So you might want to experiment with something else. I also think it could use some tighter kerning because the letters look a little spread out, which makes them not seem like words of their own. So I would work on the font a little bit and try some other things. This is alright. I would generally avoid drop shadows. They tend to look sort of amateurish, but if you're going to use a drop shadow, like if you need it to separate the text from the background, because this is sort of an orange on a bright red, so it might be hard to see. If you blur it a lot, it does help make the thing pop out, but it gets rid of some of that kind of amateurish look. I'm not too sure about this, a very short film, like tucked away in the corner like that. It's easy to miss. And I also think, you know, if short film is capitalized, then very would be capitalized as well. Sort of feel like you could maybe do better with the this red text over that. Like, what if you made the text part of the sign somehow? Look, maybe you see the wanted person, and below that person's face it says "Who shot first?" Anyway, you might try something with a bright red text, and again with the drop shadow that we want to avoid, you know, over this surface. I think you could do a little better. But overall, good work. Next up is Gabrielle. Okay, yeah, a lot of interesting elements in here. First, I would say with the riveting, there's a real opportunity here to have the mouth open in kind of a funny way when it rivets. So maybe you could turn it into like a 3D object and have it rotate forward when it rivets. I think that would be a nice touch. It would be kind of funny. Maybe the eyes move around a little bit. Maybe the eyes look left and right or something. Not really. I mean, I guess it's a pretty good font. Something about all these horizontal lines, I mean, kind of, I find a little bit distracting somehow. Somehow it's even worse later. Here, what I would say is really look at some reference of tumbleweed. If that film reel is meant to be moving like tumbleweed, I think you need to take another look in that kind of very kind of light, very just touching the ground, can sort of high bounce. It almost looks like low gravity. Isn't obviously, but just take a look at some video reference. I'm sure you can find some online, and then also look at some photo reference of what those film reels actually look like to get a more accurate drawing of that. And this, again, there's something about those horizontal lines that makes it actually hard for me to read. I mean, I know it says unfinished business, but somehow it's like my eyes feel like they're struggling with that or something. So also you should do like a fade out at the end and not just end so abruptly. Next up is Kobe. Okay, that's looking pretty good so far. I like the hat flying in. I think one thing is, if you don't have it on already, you might want to turn on motion blur. Yeah, it definitely looks like you don't. So if I go to After, okay, I've got this very simple sequence in After Effects, and I hit 0 on the numeric peak keypad, and you can see the motion, but it's kind of has almost sort of a flickery look and very sharp. But what you can do is turn on motion blur, and that has to be turned on both per layer and globally here. And you see all that blur? So let's play it back now. Doesn't that look smoother than it was before? So blur, you know, usually it's a good idea to have it on, and it's only really going to work if something is moving quickly, but it's still a useful thing, and for most motion I would say you want it on. And if it's slowing down your render, it just turns it off globally, so it kind of speeds things up, and then when you're ready you can just turn it back on. So you can imagine how that might affect the hat if you have motion blur on. Fedora Films. think that film reel is better than the one we saw before, but maybe even try to get even a little bit more lighter, like a feeling of, very lightweight, kind of like a tumbleweed. But yeah, I think this one's looking pretty good. Okay, this is Alfred. Okay. So yeah, some export problems. The studio thing, I think it's a stretch to call that part a logo. It's just really text on the screen. Also, normally you would say presents with an S rather than present. So anyways, you might think of doing something a little bit more with the logo. And I think that's a little weird because it sort of looks like it's casting a shadow on the sun behind it, which of course would be impossible, but it looks a little funny. I might stay away from that cast shadow thing. You've got moving around here. Anyway, yeah, it's got some good elements in it, and I would say more work on the logo. And then, yeah, again, I'm not really getting what that is or how that figures in. So I think I could use a little more just conceptual work because the images look okay, they look clean, but I think it needs some more just sort of ideas of what things should look like and how they should move. Next up is Princeton. Okay, yeah, so there's a lot of good stuff going on in here. Whoops. So yeah, I like the look of this. You could do a couple different facial expressions, like maybe he groggily opens his eyes and closes them again, or maybe his mouth changes at some point. I think that is reading as laughing. I think that you should try something different for this text. First of all, it looks a little stretched. Second of all, you tend to want to avoid drop shadows if you can, so tend to turn those off. And actually, I would say bevels fall in that same category. Just like good clean text will probably just look better. Also, this is just too tight on the bottom of the screen, so kind of, decrease the length between these lines and then scoot it up so it's not butting up against the bottom of the screen. And also maybe reconsider this big white frame. I don't know what that's supposed to represent. But I think it'd be better if it was just right on top of the background. Again, not too thrilled with that font. You might try something different. I like the way these bullet holes look. Those are really nice. Next up is Ariana. Looks like I had a little quiet. Let's watch it again with the sound because it was a bit too quiet. Okay, that's coming along well. It's a nice perched looking shot. You might want to add like a gun recoil and a flash. This is very kind of dark on dark, the dark gray on the dark, black background. So you might want to lighten up the text there a bit. Here I'm struggling with the text being transparent, and also as I mentioned in some other videos, the drop shadow is sort of fallen out of favor as something to do. So if you need a drop shadow to help kind of separate the text from the shot, try to kind of blur it and you might get away with it more. But you might try the text in a different position on the screen that doesn't have such a busy backdrop, but I would say stay away from the semi-transparent text. Next up is Ariana. Looks like I had a little quiet. Let's watch it again with the sound because it was a bit too quiet. Okay, that's coming along well. It's a nice perched looking shot. You might want to add like a gun recoil and a flash. This is very kind of dark on dark, the dark gray on the dark, black background. So you might want to lighten up the text there a bit. Here I'm struggling with the text being transparent, and also as I mentioned in some other videos, the drop shadow is sort of fallen out of favor as something to do. So if you need a drop shadow to help kind of separate the text from the shot, try to kind of blur it and you might get away with it more. But you might try the text in a different position on the screen that doesn't have such a busy backdrop, but I would say stay away from the semi-transparent text. And finally, make sure to do a fade out at both the beginning and the end. First of all, for the naming convention, this should actually be, not the words your first name, but your actual first name. I guess that's Nuri's, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. So it'd be Nuri's Feliciano. But let's take a look at the movie file. I'm gonna open this with VLC. Okay, I've got a lot of interesting things going on here. Again, I'm not really convinced about this logo. It's better than just a drawing, but the text doesn't sort of speak of anything in particular. It's just a font. I think tumbleweed-wise, I think you're going to want something a little bit more transparency going on, so you can see through it. One thing to take a look at is, this is okay with these guys approaching. I mean, ideally you'd want a silhouette of people riding up. Again, with the transparency on the tumbleweed, so it doesn't look like a solid ball of hay. Texas, if it's the state Texas, is spelled with an A, Texas. And the red is a bit intense. Maybe you should darken that red some, so it's not just quite so 100% bright red. It's a bit much. Next up is Markeith. Okay. So first, looking at this text, I feel like it's kind of getting lost in that image. Maybe have the image come up and then kind of either darken or blur or something to help this text pop out. But the text is kind of small. It's the placement's sort of odd. I understand you were putting in the bright area of the grass so it had better contrast, but I don't know, I just think you should try something else to make the text really pop out. And it's not really... Or the other thing you might want to do is, like, maybe you want to, carefully kind of paint and trace the main branches and twigs of the tree, and then have it fade into like a silhouette of the tree, and then have under the tree productions on that. And again, the presents get lost. And it looks like all the fonts the same, which is fine, but I just think the font of the titles shouldn't be the same as the logo. The logo should be its own sort of very unique looking thing. So I think you might want to work on that logo a little bit more. And for the dual, maybe you want to have some kind of finger twitch or some movement on these guys. You might try the puppet tool in After Effects for some of that. Very subtle sound effects in there. Yeah, but I mean, I like the images. I just think that text is a little simple and repetitive, and there's not really, a logo, because it just looks like a tree with text on the screen rather than one kind of unified image. So I think that could use some work.